They told me I was too young to matter, not with words, but with the way the shopkeeper's eyes slid past me to serve the white woman behind me, with the way the recruiting officer's hand paused over the paperwork when he saw my face, with the way my own people on the reservation looked at me like I was already a ghost. I was 16 years old, and I'd spent every one of those years learning to be invisible. The white kids in town would shove past me on the sidewalk like I was made of smoke. At school, teachers called on every raised hand except mine. On the reservation, the elders spoke around me, through me, never directly to me. Too white, too educated, too wrong. I existed in the space between two worlds, and neither one wanted to claim me. My father tried. God, he tried. "Come," he said one morning before dawn, when frost still clung to the grass. "I'll show you who you are." We walked into the forest, his steps silent, mine crashing through brush like a drunk bear. He knelt beside a deer trail, pointed at tracks in the mud. "What do you see?" "Hoof prints," I said. He shook his head. "You see marks in dirt. I see a doe, 3 years old, favoring her left rear leg. She passed through here 2 hours ago, heading toward water. She's pregnant. She'll give birth before the month ends." I stared at the same prints, saw nothing but mud. "The land speaks," he said, his voice quiet, sad. "But you've forgotten how to listen. The white man's schools taught you to read their words. They took your ears." I wanted to tell him I was trying, that I lay awake at night straining to hear whatever language the land supposedly spoke. But all I heard was emptiness, a hollow space inside my chest where something was supposed to be. "The land will teach you," he said, "if you learn to listen." But I never learned. Or maybe I was listening to the wrong thing. Maybe the emptiness was teaching me something the land never could. When the war came, it came with posters, bold letters, stirring images. "Your country needs you." A recruiter set up a table outside the general store, his uniform crisp, his smile practiced. Boys lined up, farm boys with strong backs, town boys with soft hands, all of them white, all of them welcome. I stood at the back of the crowd and watched them step forward, one by one, signing papers that would turn them into soldiers, heroes, men. I waited until the line was gone, until the recruiter was packing up his table, loosening his collar, ready to leave. "I want to enlist," I said. He looked up. His smile died when he saw my face. "How old are you, son?" 18. He studied me, saw through the lie immediately. But he also saw the empty spaces around us, the quota he hadn't filled, the numbers he needed to make. "Name, Francis Pegahmagabow." His pen hovered. "Spell that." I did. He wrote it down wrong anyway. I didn't correct him. What was the point? They'd call me whatever they wanted regardless. "You understand what you're signing up for?" he asked. "This isn't some adventure. Men are dying over there, real dying. No glory, no parades, just mud and bullets and gas." "I understand," I said. He pushed the paper across the table. "Sign here." My hand was steady. That surprised me. I thought I'd feel something. Fear, excitement, doubt. But there was just the emptiness, patient and hungry, waiting to be filled. I signed. My father found out that night. I came home to find him sitting by the fire, my enlistment paper in his hands. He didn't look up when I entered. "You think the war will give you answers?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not looking for answers," I said. "Then what?" I couldn't explain it. "How do you tell your father that you volunteered for war because at least there, invisibility might be useful? That being nothing might finally mean something? A purpose," I said finally. He looked at me then, and his eyes were old, ancient, like he'd already watched me die and was looking at a ghost. "The war won't give you purpose," he said. "It'll take everything you are and replace it with something else. Something that knows how to kill, but forgot how to live." He fed my enlistment paper to the fire. "But you won't believe me until it's already done." We sat in silence as the paper burned. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I'd be different, that I'd come back whole, but the lie stuck in my throat. "I left at dawn. No ceremony, no goodbye. Just me and a canvas bag walking toward the train station while the reservation still slept. The platform was chaos. Boys everywhere, laughing too loud, making promises to crying girls, pretending they weren't terrified. I found a spot away from the crowd and waited. A kid with red hair and freckles noticed me. Farm boy, probably never seen an Indian up close. "Where you from?" he asked, trying to be friendly. "North." "North where?" I didn't answer. He laughed, uncomfortable, and walked away. They all walked away eventually. That was fine. I was used to it. The train arrived, belching black smoke. We boarded like cattle, packed tight, no seats, standing room only. The whistle blew, the platform slid away, and I watched through dirty windows as everything familiar disappeared into distance and steam. A sergeant walked through the car, checking papers. When he got to me, he stopped. "You sure you're in the right place, boy?" Every head turned. 50 white faces staring at the Indian who didn't belong. I met his eyes, didn't blink, didn't look away. "Yes, sir." He held my stare for a long moment, then moved on. But I felt it, the weight of their attention, their doubt, their certainty that I'd be the first to break, the first to die, the first to prove I didn't belong. They were wrong about the first two, but they were right about the last. The train carried us east for 2 days. Boys talked about what they'd do to the Germans, how they'd be heroes, how they'd come home decorated and honored and changed. I said nothing, just watched the landscape blur past, forests giving way to cities, cities giving way to ports, everything becoming more mechanical, more industrial, more like a machine designed to consume young men and spit out whatever was left. When we finally stopped, I saw the ship waiting. A massive steel coffin floating in grey water. The gangplank looked like a tongue, ready to swallow us whole. The sergeant called names, mispronounced most of them, butchered mine completely. I stepped forward anyway, up the gangplank, onto the deck, into the belly of the beast. Behind me, the farm boy was crying. Others were praying. Some were still pretending to be brave. I felt nothing, just the emptiness. Just the hunger, just the certainty that whatever waited across that ocean couldn't be worse than being nothing. They said I was too young to matter. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The ocean stretched ahead, dark, infinite, hungry, and I was ready to become whatever it needed me to be. The crossing took 14 days, 2 weeks of metal groaning like something dying, 2 weeks of vomit and sweat, and men crying in languages I didn't speak but understood perfectly. We were cargo, packed below deck in hammocks stacked 3 high, breathing the same stale air until it tasted like copper and fear. I didn't get seasick. My body refused to give up anything it didn't have to. But I watched others lean over buckets, over railings, emptying themselves into the Atlantic like they could purge the terror along with their breakfast. It didn't work. Fear doesn't leave through your stomach. It burrows deeper, finds places in your bones you didn't know existed. The ship smelled wrong. Rust and diesel and something organic, something rotting. At night, the darkness was total. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face, could only hear breathing, whimpering, prayers muttered in a dozen different tongues, all asking the same God for the same impossible thing. Let me survive. Let me go home. Let this be a dream. I learned their sounds. The farm boy with red hair snored like a broken engine. A French-Canadian kid, 3 hammocks over, ground his teeth so hard I thought they'd shatter. Someone cried every night, quiet, ashamed, trying to muffle it in his blanket. Nobody acknowledged it. We all pretended sleep while he broke apart in the darkness. On day 9, a soldier hanged himself in the latrine. They cut him down and wrapped him in canvas and threw him overboard before breakfast. The captain made an announcement about cowardice and duty and sacrifice. Then we ate our rations and pretended a man hadn't just chosen drowning over whatever waited for us in France. When we finally saw land, it wasn't relief. It was dread taking shape. Europe looked grey, leached of colour, like God had given up on beauty. The port was chaos. Thousands of soldiers moving like ants, loading supplies, shouting orders, all of it mechanical, efficient. We weren't arriving at a war. We were being fed into a machine. They loaded us onto trains. Cattle cars, that's what they were. 40 men crammed into spaces designed for livestock. No windows, no seats, just wooden slats and the smell of whoever had been transported before us. Blood, shit, desperation. We stood shoulder to shoulder, swaying with the motion, unable to sit, unable to breathe without tasting someone else's fear. The farm boy tried to start a song. His voice cracked on the second word. Nobody joined him. The silence that followed was worse than the attempt. It confirmed what we all knew but didn't want to say. This wasn't an adventure. We weren't heroes. We were just bodies being delivered to the place where bodies were needed. The ride lasted hours, maybe days. Time stopped behaving. When the doors finally opened, the light was blinding. We stumbled out onto mud that grabbed our boots and didn't want to let go. That's when I saw it. The camp. Endless rows of canvas tents stretching to the horizon. Thousands of men moving in formation, all of them with the same expression. Hollow, vacant, already dead, just waiting for their bodies to catch up. A sergeant walked the line, inspecting us like livestock. He stopped in front of me, looked me up and down. I could see the calculation in his eyes. Too young, too small, too Indian. "How old are you, boy?" I met his stare. Didn't blink. Old enough. Something shifted in his face. Not respect, recognition. He saw the emptiness, saw that I was already gone. He moved on. They issued us uniforms. Stiff, reeking of whoever wore them before, probably dead now. Boots that didn't fit. Helmets that felt like they were designed to crush your skull instead of protect it. And rifles. Heavy, cold, real. The sergeant showed us how to load them, how to aim, how to kill. He used a straw dummy, showed us where to aim for maximum damage, heart, head, center mass. He said it the way you'd explain how to change a tire. Mechanical, practical, boring. The rifle doesn't care who you are, he said, his voice flat, dead. Doesn't care where you're from, what you believe, who you love. It does one thing. You point it, you squeeze. Something stops living. That's war. That's all war is. Everything else is just stories we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. I held the rifle in my hands, felt its weight. This was the tool I would use to erase people, to stop hearts, to turn consciousness into nothing. And the strangest part, it felt lighter than the emptiness I'd been carrying my whole life. Training was designed to break us, not physically, mentally. They didn't want soldiers. They wanted units, interchangeable parts. They screamed at us, made us run until we vomited, made us dig trenches and fill them in and dig them again, made us do pointless tasks for hours just to prove we would, just to demonstrate that our will was no longer our own. I watched men crack. The farm boy lasted 3 days before he started crying during drills. A kid from Toronto refused an order and got beaten in front of everyone. Another just stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped being anything except a body that still breathed. But I didn't break, because I was already broken. They were trying to empty us out, but I was already empty. They were trying to erase us, but I was already erased. I was the perfect soldier because I had nothing left to sacrifice. The officers noticed. One pulled me aside during rifle practice. "You shot expert on your first try," he said, studying me like I was a puzzle. "You move quiet. You don't talk. You don't hesitate." He paused, considering. "We need scouts. Men who can move through enemy territory alone. Men who can survive without support. Men who don't need other men." "I'm interested," I said. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "Good. Because where you're going, hesitation gets you killed. Emotion gets you killed. Being human gets you killed." I wanted to tell him I'd already stopped being human, that I'd left that behind somewhere between the reservation and the ship, but he wouldn't have understood. Nobody would. The front was 3 days away. We could hear it before we saw it. A constant low rumble, like thunder that never stopped, like the earth was being torn apart, like God was breaking his own creation. We marched toward it in silence. Nobody sang, nobody joked. We just walked, one foot, then another, closer to the place where the war stopped being abstract. When we crested the final hill, I saw it. No man's land, a wasteland stretching forever, mud and craters and barbed wire glinting in weak sunlight. The trenches cut across the landscape like scars, zigzagging, deliberate, ugly. And beyond them, in the smoke and distance, the enemy, men just like us, scared, cold, waiting for the same inevitable thing. A soldier next to me whispered, "Jesus Christ." But there was no Christ here, no God, no mercy, just the machine, grinding, consuming, indifferent to everything except its own continuation. We descended into the trench. The walls were wet earth, weeping constantly. The floor was mud that came up to our ankles, sucking at our boots with every step. It smelled like rot and shit and something worse, something chemical and organic mixed together, the smell of bodies decomposing in places they couldn't be recovered. Men sat with their backs against the dirt walls, staring at nothing. Some didn't even look up when we arrived. They had already learned what we were still figuring out. The war doesn't see faces, doesn't hear names, doesn't care about stories or dreams or futures. It only sees bodies, numbers, replaceable parts in a machine that never stops grinding. A corporal grabbed my arm, pulled me aside. "You're the scout, right? The Indian?" I nodded. "Good. We need someone to go out tonight, past their wire, see what's waiting for us." He handed me a map, coordinates marked in pencil. "Don't get caught. They torture scouts. Pull out your fingernails. Break your fingers one by one until you tell them everything. Then they kill you slow." He walked away before I could respond. I looked at the map, at the coordinates, at the distance between here and there. Then I looked out over the parapet at no man's land, at the space where men became ghosts, where the invisible survived and the visible died. And I realized, standing there in that trench, listening to the distant thunder of artillery, breathing the smell of death and mud and fear, I had been preparing for this my whole life, to be invisible, to be nobody, to exist in spaces nobody else wanted to occupy. They had called me too young, too weak, too insignificant to matter. But here, where men were nothing but numbers, where survival meant disappearing, I was exactly what the war needed. Someone who had already learned how to vanish. I waited until full dark. Not twilight, not dusk, but the absolute black that came 2 hours after sunset, when the moon was nothing but a sliver, and clouds covered even that. The kind of darkness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, where shapes dissolved into shadow, where men became ghosts. The corporal checked my gear one last time. No metal that could clink. No papers that could identify our unit if I was captured. No dog tags. Those would come off before I went over the top. If I died out there, I'd be just another body. Unidentified, uncounted, unmourned. "Stay low," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Stay quiet. If a flare goes up, freeze. Don't run, don't hide, just freeze. Movement draws the eye. Stillness is invisible." He handed me a trench knife. Short, brutal, designed for close work. "If you have to kill, do it silent. No gunshots, no screaming. Just the knife and your hands." I took it, felt its weight. 7 inches of blackened steel. My father had taught me to hunt deer with patience and respect. This was different. This was hunting men. "And if you get caught?" the corporal asked. "I won't," I said. He studied my face, looking for fear, doubt, hesitation. Found nothing. That seemed to disturb him more than if I'd been terrified. "Move out," he said. I climbed over the parapet at exactly 2300 hours. The moment my boots touched no man's land, everything changed. The sounds became sharper, every whisper of wind, every splash of water in craters, every distant cough from the German trenches. My breathing slowed. My heartbeat dropped. My vision adjusted to the darkness, finding shapes in shadow, patterns in chaos. I moved the way my father had taught me. Weight on the balls of my feet, each step tested before committing, body low to the ground. The mud sucked at my boots, but I'd learned the trick. Move with it, not against it. Let it release you instead of fighting it. The first obstacle was the wire. Ours. 50 meters of barbed wire strung between wooden posts, rusty and vicious, designed to catch flesh and hold it while bullets found it. There was a gap. There was always a gap, where a patrol had cut through the night before. I found it by feel, by memory, by instinct. Beyond our wire was the space between. No man's land proper, a lunar landscape of craters and corpses and unexploded shells half buried in mud. I moved from crater to crater, pausing in each one, listening, watching, becoming part of the landscape before moving to the next. In the third crater, I found a body. British, dead maybe 2 weeks. The rats had been at him. I pressed myself against him, used him as cover, and scanned the German line for movement. Nothing. Just the faint glow of cigarettes, the occasional cough, the sound of men trying to stay awake on watch. A flare went up, sudden, blinding. The entire world turned white. I froze, not because I decided to, but because my body knew before my mind did. I became stone, became nothing. My face pressed into the dead man's shoulder, my breath held, my heart hammering so hard I thought they'd hear it across the 200 meters of mud separating us. The flare drifted down, hanging in the air like a dying star. 3 seconds, 5, 10, then darkness returned like a curtain falling. I exhaled slowly, silently, and kept moving. Their wire was different from ours, newer, thicker, strung in elaborate patterns designed to funnel attackers into killing zones. I studied it for 15 minutes, memorizing the pattern, finding the weak points, the places where posts had shifted or wire had sagged. I found a gap low to the ground, barely wide enough for a man if he flattened himself completely. I went through on my stomach, inch by inch, feeling barbs catch my uniform but not my skin, my father's voice in my head. Make yourself smaller than the space you're moving through. Become water, become air. Beyond their wire, I was in their territory. Every breath was trespassing. Every sound was death. I could hear them now. Voices, low and tired, speaking German I didn't understand but recognized. Bored, scared, human, just like our side. Just men waiting in mud, waiting to kill or be killed, whichever came first. I moved parallel to their trench, staying 20 meters back, counting positions. Machine gun nest here, officers dug out there, communication trench leading to secondary line, ammunition store, aid station. I memorized it all, building a map in my head, noting weaknesses, gaps, opportunities. Then I saw him, sentry, alone, standing in a shallow section of trench, smoking a cigarette. The glow was a tiny sun in the darkness. He was young, my age, maybe younger. His rifle leaned against the trench wall, not in his hands. He was staring at nothing, lost in thought, probably thinking about home. I watched him for 10 minutes, studied his pattern. Every 3 minutes he'd check his watch. Every 5, he'd light a new cigarette. He was bored, careless, mortal. I could kill him. It would be easy. Come up behind him, hand over his mouth, knife between the ribs. He'd be dead before he knew I was there. One less German, one less enemy. One more number in a war that counted bodies like inventory. But that wasn't the mission. The mission was reconnaissance. Observe and report. Don't engage. Stay invisible. So I watched him live. Watched him smoke. Watched him check his watch. Watched him exist for a few more minutes, hours, maybe days, however long he had before the war took him. Then I moved on. I got within 10 meters of their secondary line before I heard it. Voices, closer than they should be. A patrol. 4 men. Moving through the communication trench toward my position. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached me. I pressed myself into the mud at the base of the trench wall, where shadow was deepest, controlled my breathing, slowed my heartbeat, became nothing, became landscape, became part of the earth. They passed within arm's reach. I could smell their cigarettes, their sweat, their fear, could hear them complaining about the cold, about the rats, about wanting to go home. One of them stopped directly above me, so close I could have reached up and grabbed his ankle. He stood there for an eternity, probably 10 seconds, looking out over no man's land, scanning for threats that were already inside their perimeter. Then he moved on. I waited 5 more minutes before I moved, gave them time to get distant, gave my heart time to stop trying to hammer through my ribs. Then I started back. The return trip took 3 hours, slower, more careful, paranoia creeping in with every step. They might have seen me, might be waiting, might have set a trap. But when I finally slipped back through our wire, back over the parapet, back into the trench, there was nothing. No alarm, no shots, no indication anyone had known I was there. The corporal grabbed me the moment my boots hit the duckboards. "Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead," he said. His hands were shaking. "You've been gone 6 hours. 6 fucking hours, had I?" Time had stopped meaning anything out there. "What did you see?" he demanded. I told him. Everything. Every position. Every weakness. Every number. He wrote it down, hands still trembling, looking at me like I was something he couldn't quite understand. "How?" he finally asked. "How did you get that close without being seen?" I didn't know how to answer, because I didn't do anything special. I just became what I'd always been. Invisible, insignificant, nothing. I just stopped existing in the way that makes people see you. I disappeared, I said. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like he'd just understood something terrible. "Get some rest," he said. "You're going out again tomorrow night." I found a spot in the trench and sat with my back against the wet earth. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. My heart had already slowed to its resting rate. I had just spent 6 hours in enemy territory, had been close enough to kill, had been close enough to die, had moved through space where discovery meant torture and death, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not fear, not pride, just emptiness. The same emptiness I'd always carried. Except now I understood what it was for. My father had been right. The land had taught me, but not the lessons he'd meant. Not tracking or hunting or respect for life. The land had taught me how to become nothing, how to disappear, how to survive by ceasing to exist. They had called me too young, too weak, too invisible to matter. But out there, in the dark, in the space between death and survival, being invisible was the only thing that kept you alive. I had found my purpose, and it terrified me how right it felt. The mission came 3 nights later. Not reconnaissance this time, elimination. A German officer had been spotted coordinating artillery strikes from an observation post. He was good at his job, too good. Our men were dying because of him. "Take him out," the lieutenant said, handing me coordinates. Quiet, no alarm, in and out. He didn't say, "Kill him." Officers never said kill. They said neutralize, eliminate, remove. Language to make murder sound like maintenance. I left at 0200 hours. New moon. No light except stars, and those were hidden behind clouds. Perfect conditions. Perfect darkness. I moved faster now. 3 nights of practice had taught me the rhythm, the pattern, the dance of staying alive in the space where men died. I knew which craters had water, which had bodies, which had unexploded shells waiting to detonate. I knew where the wire sagged, where the mud was firmest, where the German sentries got careless. I was through their wire in 20 minutes, a new record. The observation post was exactly where intelligence said it would be. A reinforced dugout with a good view of our lines, protected by sandbags and earth. 2 sentries outside. I watched them from 50 meters away, timing their movements, counting their cigarettes, learning their pattern. They changed guard every hour. At 0340, the relief came, 2 fresh sentries replacing 2 exhausted ones. In that 30-second window of confusion, of handoffs and small talk and lowered vigilance, I moved, crossed the 50 meters in 40 seconds, pressed myself against the sandbags, listened. Inside I could hear voices, 2 men. One was the officer. I could tell by the tone, the authority, the way the other man responded with deference. They were looking at maps, discussing coordinates, planning tomorrow's barrage, planning to kill more of us. I waited. Patience was everything. Rushing was death. At 0410, the junior man left. I heard boots on duckboards, heard him climb the steps, heard him tell the sentries he was going to check the wire. The officer was alone. I moved to the entrance, paused, listened, breathing inside, paper rustling, the scratch of a pen on a map. I descended the steps, silent, each foot placed with absolute precision. The dugout was lit by a single candle. The officer sat at a makeshift desk, his back to me, studying maps spread across the surface. He was young, maybe 30, blonde hair, clean uniform, a photograph pinned to the wall, wife and daughter, smiling, unaware their husband and father had maybe 5 more seconds to live. He sensed something, started to turn. I was on him before he could make a sound. My hand clamped over his mouth. My knife found the space between his ribs, the spot the sergeant had shown us, the spot that kills fast if you angle it right. I felt resistance, felt the fabric of his uniform, felt the skin break, felt the blade slide into flesh, into organs, into the wet machinery that kept him alive. He struggled, not much, just enough to remind me he was real. His hands grabbed at mine. His body went rigid. His eyes, blue eyes, I'll always remember they were blue, went wide with understanding, with terror, with the knowledge that this was it. This was the end. This was how his story finished. In a dugout, in the dark, killed by someone he never saw coming. I held him, felt him fight, felt him weaken, felt the moment when the strength left his body and he became weight. Dead weight. Just meat and bones and memories that would stop mattering in about 30 seconds. I lowered him to the floor, kept my hand over his mouth even though he was gone, even though there was no one left to scream. My knife was still in him. I pulled it out. It made a sound, a wet sucking sound that I'll hear forever, and wiped it on his uniform. His eyes were still open, still staring, still seeing nothing. I closed them, don't know why. It didn't matter. He was gone, but I did it anyway. Then I stayed there, kneeling beside a dead man, holding death in my hands, trying to understand what I'd just done, what I'd just become. Time broke. Seconds became hours. Hours became seconds. I was outside myself, watching from somewhere distant as a boy named Francis knelt in a dugout, holding a German officer who would never go home, never see his wife again, never hold his daughter. I waited for something. Guilt, horror, regret, the weight of taking a life, the moral consequence my father had warned me about. The moment when you realize you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. But there was nothing, just emptiness. The same emptiness I'd always carried, except now it had a body count. That was the horror, not the killing, the absence, the void where feeling should have been. I had just murdered a man, and my hands were already steady. My breathing was already normal. My mind was already moving to next steps. Take his maps, take his papers, take his identification tags. Make it look like intelligence gathering, not assassination. Leave no evidence, no witnesses, no proof I was ever here. I did all of it, mechanically, efficiently, like checking items off a list. I heard boots on the steps, the junior officer returning. I had maybe 5 seconds. I pressed myself into the corner behind the entrance. Shadow within shadow. The junior officer descended, started talking before he could see. "Sir, the wire is secure, but I think we should..." He saw the body, froze, his mouth opened to shout. I was on him before sound could form. This one was harder. He was alert. Ready. He fought. We went down together in the narrow space, grappling, silent, desperate. His hands found my throat. My knife found his ribs. He gasped, not loud, just a sharp intake of breath, and went slack. Two dead men in 30 seconds. I hadn't planned the second, hadn't wanted it. But he was there and I was there, and survival doesn't care about plans. I took his tags too, left them both on the floor of the dugout, left the candle burning. Let them be discovered. Let the Germans know what had happened. Let them be afraid. Getting out was harder than getting in. The sentries were alert now, nervous, sensing something wrong. I waited in the darkness outside the dugout, timing their movements, waiting for the gap. It came. I moved. Through their trench, over their parapet, into no man's land. A shout went up behind me. They'd found the bodies. Flares shot into the sky. Machine guns opened up, spraying bullets across the wasteland, hoping to hit whatever had just killed 2 of their officers. I was already in a crater, already invisible, already gone. The shooting lasted 5 minutes. Then silence, cautious, suspicious. But I was a ghost, and ghosts don't leave footprints. I made it back to our lines at Fine 20. The lieutenant was waiting. Well? I handed him the maps, the papers, the identification tags, 2 sets. He looked at the tags, then at me, really looked, searching my face for something. Remorse, trauma, humanity. Found nothing. Jesus Christ, he whispered. You got both of them. The second one saw me, I said. Had to. As if killing was something that just happened. As if I'd had no choice. As if I hadn't felt the knife go in, hadn't watched the light leave his eyes, hadn't become exactly what the war needed me to become. Good work, the lieutenant said. Then, quieter, almost to himself. What the hell are you? I didn't answer. Didn't know how. What was I? A boy who'd just killed 2 men and felt nothing? A weapon wrapped in skin? A ghost that bled? I went to my section of trench, sat down, put my back against wet earth. Around me, soldiers were waking up, stretching, complaining about coffee, existing. The farm boy sat beside me. Heard you got one, he said. Word traveled fast. Everything was gossip in the trenches. 2, I said. His eyes went wide. How was it? I looked at him, at his clean hands, at his face that hadn't seen what I'd just seen, at his belief that there were answers to the questions he was asking. Quiet, I said. It was quiet. And it was. The quietest moment of my life. The moment between alive and dead. That infinite silent space where I became something I couldn't take back. That night, I tried to sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw blue eyes, felt the weight of him, the warmth fading. The moment when person became thing. But it wasn't guilt keeping me awake. It was fear. Not of what I'd done, of what I'd discovered about myself. That I could take a life without hesitation, without remorse, without leaving a trace of humanity behind. The emptiness inside me wasn't a wound. It was a weapon. And the war had just taught me how to use it. My father had told me stories about warriors, about the sacred responsibility of taking life, about rituals and respect, and understanding that death mattered. But there were no rituals here, no respect. Just bodies, just numbers, just the arithmetic of survival. I had crossed a line. I knew that. I also knew I would cross it again and again, until crossing it became as automatic as breathing. That's what terrified me, not the killing, the ease of it. The first kill never leaves you, not because of guilt, but because it shows you what you're capable of, what you can become when necessity and opportunity align, what lives in the empty spaces inside you, waiting for permission to come out. I gave it permission, and it came out hungry. After the double kill, They started using me differently, not as a scout anymore, as a solution, a weapon with legs. They'd give me a name, a position, sometimes just coordinates. I'd go into the dark, come back lighter, problem solved, target eliminated, mission complete. I stopped counting after 12, not because I lost track, because numbers stopped meaning anything. Each kill was just repetition, another set of eyes going empty, another body becoming weight, another heartbeat stopped. The details blurred together into a single continuous action. Identify, approach, eliminate, extract. The other soldiers changed around me. They'd stop talking when I walked past. Not out of respect, out of something closer to fear. Like death followed me and might spill over if they got too close. They weren't wrong. I did carry death. Could feel it in my hands, in my knife, in the space behind my eyes where feeling used to be. The farm boy stopped looking at me entirely. Would turn away when I approached, find reasons to be somewhere else. Once I caught him staring at my hands, hands that had killed, hands that had held dying men, hands that worked efficiently whether I was eating rations or ending lives. He looked away fast, never spoke to me again. Word spread. Soldiers talk. Rumors travel faster than orders, faster than bullets. They started calling me things. The Silent One, the Shadow, the Ghost. Names I never asked for, but didn't correct. Names were just noise. What mattered was the work. The Germans noticed too. I could tell by how their patrols moved. Tighter formations, more frequent checks, less time alone. They stopped posting single sentries, started traveling in pairs, in groups, started checking shadows, started being afraid of darkness in new ways. That's when I knew I'd become more than a soldier. I'd become a presence, a rumor, a thing that lived in the space between what they knew and what they feared. I heard them talking once. I was crouched in a shell hole, 20 meters from their trench, close enough to smell their cigarettes and fear. 3 of them, voices low, discussing me. Der Geist, one said. The Ghost. Bullshit, another replied. It's just propaganda, trying to scare us. Then explain the officers, the first one said. 7 in 2 weeks, all killed the same way, throat or ribs, silent, no alarm, no witnesses, just dead men and empty dugouts. 7. I'd lost count, but apparently they were keeping track for me. I heard he can walk through wire without touching it, a third voice said, younger, more frightened. That he can see in complete darkness, that he's killed dozens without ever being seen. That's impossible, the second one said, but his voice wavered. He wanted to believe it was impossible, needed to believe it. Is it? The young one asked. Müller was in his bunker, door barred from inside. They found him with his throat cut. How do you explain that? Silence. Because they couldn't explain it. Because fear fills the spaces where explanation fails. I stayed in that crater for another hour, listening to them build my legend, turn me into something more than human, more than real. It should have felt like something. Pride, satisfaction, vindication. But it just felt empty. I had become exactly what the war needed. A story that killed, and stories don't feel anything. Their fear became my weapon. Fear makes people predictable. They posted extra sentries, which meant more targets. They increased patrols, which meant more opportunities. They tried to hunt me, which meant they were thinking about me, and thinking about me meant I was already in their heads. A German sniper set up specifically to watch for me. I spotted him on my 4th night out. Position too perfect for observation, too exposed for normal ops. He was bait and hunter, waiting for me to reveal myself so he could take the shot that would end the ghost story and make him a hero. I watched him for 3 nights. Learned his discipline, his patience, his routine. He was good, very good, professional. On the 4th night, I came from behind, walked through their own trenches like I belonged there, like I was just another German soldier moving between positions. He never heard me, never saw me, just felt the knife. His eyes went wide with surprise, not fear, not pain, just genuine shock that I'd broken the rules, that the ghost hadn't come from no man's land, but from inside their own lines. I took his rifle, beautiful weapon, Mauser K98, scope zeroed perfectly. I left him propped in his position, rifle in hands, eyes open, facing out toward no man's land. A message: the ghost is real, he's closer than you think, and your best isn't good enough. My kill count climbed. 20, 30, 40. The numbers meant nothing to me, but everything to command. They started bringing me maps, photographs, intelligence reports, asking what was possible, what could be done. I became a consultant in death, an expert in erasure. The new captain looked at me like I was a dangerous dog, useful but unpredictable, loyal but not quite tame. "You understand what you are to them now?" he asked one morning after I'd returned from eliminating a German forward observer. I waited. "You're the monster under the bed," he said. "The thing in the dark. The reason they're afraid to close their eyes." "Good," I said. First time I'd volunteered an opinion in weeks. The captain studied me, trying to decide if I was damaged or effective. He chose effective. Easier that way. Damage could wait. They gave me a spotter once. Kid from Ottawa, barely 18, supposed to help with reconnaissance and provide covering fire. He lasted 2 missions, not because he died, because he couldn't handle watching me work. The way I moved, the silence, the efficiency. After the 2nd mission, he requested a transfer. "He's not human," I heard him tell the sergeant. "Being near him makes my skin crawl. It's like standing next to something dead that forgot to stop moving." They granted his transfer. I went back to working alone. Alone was better. No witnesses. No one to see the transformation when I stopped being human and became function. When my breathing slowed, my thoughts quieted, and I became pure intention, hunter, predator, ghost. The big offensive came in spring. Thousands of men going over the top, charging into machine gun fire, dying in rows. The noise was infinite. Shells, screams, the wet sound of bullets hitting flesh. But in the chaos, I moved. While everyone was distracted by the spectacle of mass death, I slipped through German lines and eliminated 4 officers in 30 minutes. Command posts, artillery observers, machine gun commanders, each one a quick, silent death, each one making the offensive slightly less lethal for our side. That night, in a captured trench still warm with German blood, I overheard 2 soldiers from a different unit talking. "You hear about the Indian?" one said. "What Indian?" "The ghost, the scout. They say he's killed over 100 Germans, by himself, without ever being seen." "That's bullshit." "Maybe. But the Germans believe it. They're terrified. I heard they're pulling men off the line just to hunt him. Specialists, trained killers sent specifically to kill one man." I sat in the shadows listening to myself become legend, become myth. It should have meant something, should have felt like validation, like mattering, like finally being seen, but it just felt empty. I had become what the war needed, a ghost story that killed, and ghost stories don't feel anything. They just happen over and over until they end. But the Germans weren't just afraid anymore. They were adapting, learning, becoming dangerous in new ways. They put out a reward for information leading to my capture or death. They trained counter-snipers, counter-scouts, men who specialized in men like me. They studied my patterns, analyzed my methods, built profiles, and they were coming. I could feel it. The way you feel weather changing before a storm. The way animals sense predators before they strike. The hunt was going both ways now. I'd been the hunter so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be prey. The paranoia, the constant vigilance, the understanding that invisible doesn't mean invincible, that ghosts can die, that nothing lasts forever, not even me. They were out there, in the dark, watching, waiting, learning to hunt the way I hunted, becoming ghosts to catch a ghost. And part of me, the part that still remembered being human, was almost grateful, because being hunted meant being seen, meant mattering, meant existing in a way I hadn't since I'd left the reservation, even if that existence was someone wanting me dead. I cleaned my rifle that night with unusual care, checked my knife, my ammunition, my roots, prepared not for a mission, but for something else. Something that felt almost like anticipation. The prey was learning to hunt back. The students had become teachers, the hunted had become hunters, and I was curious, genuinely curious, what would happen when silence met silence, when ghost met ghost, when the thing they feared proved to be real and mortal and killable. Would I die surprised, like the sniper I'd killed? Eyes wide, mouth open. Would I die understanding that I'd finally met someone as empty as me? Someone as perfect at this terrible work? I didn't know. But I was going to find out, because I was going back out there, into the dark, into the space where the hunters were waiting. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because being hunted was the closest thing to feeling alive I'd experienced in months. Because the emptiness inside me was hungry, and it needed to know if there was something out there that could fill it, even if that something was death. The first time I knew they were hunting me, I felt it before I saw anything. A wrongness in the air, like the texture of darkness had changed. I was crossing through a sector I'd moved through dozens of times. Same craters, same wire, same angles of approach. But something was different. Something was waiting. I froze mid-step, became stone, let my eyes scan without moving my head, let my ears do the work. There, a shadow that was too uniform, too still, too perfectly placed. Someone else had learned to disappear. Someone else had learned to wait. We stayed like that for over an hour. Two predators locked in a stalemate of patience. My legs cramped. My back screamed. My bladder was full. But I didn't move, didn't adjust, didn't breathe deeply. Just shallow sips of air. Just enough to stay conscious. The pain became texture, became something I existed beside instead of inside. I'd learned that trick weeks ago, how to separate body from mind, how to become just awareness floating in meat that hurt. Eventually, a flare went up from a different sector. Brief distraction, moment of inattention. I slipped backward into a crater I'd memorized, and when the light died, I was gone. But I knew the game had changed. They weren't just afraid anymore. They were learning, evolving, becoming what I was, I told the captain. He listened with a face that did mathematics with human lives, calculating costs, weighing risks, determining if the weapon was still worth using, or if it had become too expensive to maintain. How many? He asked. At least one, I said. Probably more. He nodded. Can you handle it? Not really a question. An assessment. Can the weapon still function if other weapons are pointed at it? Yes, I said, but I was lying. Not about handling it. About understanding what I was up against. These weren't regular soldiers. These were specialists. Men trained specifically to counter men like me. They had studied the ghost stories, analyzed the patterns, built profiles. They knew me better than I knew myself. The second encounter came 3 nights later. I was approaching a German observation post when instinct screamed. I dropped into a shell hole just as a bullet cracked through the space where my head had been. So close I felt the displacement, felt the air move,
on foot,
felt death pass within inches. Sniper, professional. He'd predicted my route, pre-positioned, waited in silence for hours, maybe days, for that one shot. And he'd missed, but only barely, a fraction of a second, a hair's breadth. I didn't move for 4 hours, lay in the mud, face pressed into water that smelled like corpse and chemicals, controlling my breathing, slowing my heartbeat, letting my mind work through the geometry. Where was he? What angle gave him that shot? How long could he maintain position? My body wanted to panic, wanted to run, wanted to do something, anything except lie still. But panic was death. Movement was death. Only stillness kept you breathing. When I finally moved, I moved sideways into terrain with no angles, no sight lines, where patience became disadvantaged because there was nothing to see. I heard him shift. Tiny sound, adjustment of weight, frustration of a perfect ambush wasted. Good. Frustration leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to death. I circled wide. Took 6 hours to get behind his position. Found him just before dawn, prone, rifle trained on approaches, still waiting for me to make a mistake. He was younger than I expected, maybe 20, thin, hungry looking. A specialist pulled from somewhere else and given one mission: kill the ghost. I could have taken him then, quietly, from behind, but I didn't. Instead, I backed away as silently as I'd approached. Let him keep waiting. Let him wonder if I'd ever been there. Let him doubt his own senses, because dead men don't feel fear. But men who wonder, men who doubt, they're already half defeated. Over the next weeks, I encountered them constantly, not in firefights, in silent duels, games of patience played across no man's land where losing meant not existing anymore. One almost got me. I was moving through a communication trench when I saw the tripwire, barely visible, piano wire at ankle height, but it wasn't connected to explosives. It was connected to a bell, a signal. Trip it, and they'd know exactly where I was. I stepped over it, moved 10 meters, stopped, because obvious traps are bait. The real trap is always somewhere else. I scanned the trench walls. Nothing. The floor. Nothing. Then I looked up. There, false ceiling. Canvas painted to match mud. And behind it, barely visible, the shape of a man, waiting. Hoping I'd relax after avoiding the obvious trap. Hoping I'd walk directly beneath him. I backed out, went around, found a different route. But my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Respect. These men were good. They were learning, evolving, becoming ghosts themselves to hunt a ghost. The captain called me in after a week of this. "You're not going out as much," he observed. I didn't deny it. Why? "They're hunting me specifically," I said. "If I move predictably, I'm dead." He considered this. So, become unpredictable, as if it was simple, as if unpredictability wasn't just another pattern waiting to be decoded. But he was right. I was letting them control the engagement, letting them dictate terms. I needed to change the rules. I started taking missions that made no tactical sense, hitting targets with no strategic value, moving through sectors at impossible times, creating noise in some areas, complete silence in others, becoming chaos instead of pattern. It worked. The hunters couldn't predict chaos, would set ambushes in logical places, and I'd be somewhere impossible, would wait in silence, and I'd announce myself with noise, then disappear before they could respond. I stopped being a ghost, became something worse, became uncertainty, became everywhere and nowhere, became the thing you can't prepare for because it has no rules. But the cost was exhaustion, total, complete, constant vigilance, permanent paranoia. Every shadow could hide a hunter. Every silence could conceal a trap. Every moment could be the last. I stopped sleeping more than minutes at a time. Stopped eating unless weakness forced it. My hands developed a permanent tremor. My eyes hollowed. Weight dropped off me like I was being erased from the inside out. But I couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying, and dying meant they won. One night I found an empty ambush position, abandoned hours before. I sat in it, in the exact spot where someone had waited for me, and tried to imagine their thoughts. Were they frustrated? Afraid? Did they wonder if I was real? Did they start to doubt? I found a cigarette butt, still fresh. He'd been nervous, smoking when he should have been still, human, fallible, mortal, just like me. And that realization was almost comforting. We were both just men pretending to be monsters, both learning to hunt while being hunted, both wondering how long we could sustain this before something broke. The farm boy died during this time. Not from a German hunter. From a random shell. Wrong place, wrong moment. The arithmetic of war. I heard about it third hand from a soldier I didn't know. You knew him, right? The redhead from Manitoba? Yeah, I said. He's gone. Piece of shrapnel. Probably didn't feel it. Probably didn't feel it. As if that mattered. As if feeling or not feeling changed the fundamental fact of not existing anymore. I didn't go see the body. Didn't know what I'd say or feel. He'd asked me once how I kept going out there. I never gave him a real answer. Now I never could. That night I went into no man's land, not for a mission, but just to move, to feel the space, to remind myself I was still faster than death, still quieter than silence, still more dangerous than the dangerous. I made it halfway across when I felt it again. That presence, that wrongness. Someone was out there with me, another hunter, another ghost. We never saw each other, never fired, but we both knew. Somewhere in the darkness, two predators were circling, two men who'd become weapons. Two ghosts who understood that eventually, inevitably, we would meet. Face to face, function to function, emptiness to emptiness. And when we did, only one would leave. Maybe neither. I made it back to our lines as dawn broke. The captain was waiting, like he always was when I stayed out too long. You were gone 12 hours, he said. Had I? Time had stopped meaning anything. There's someone out there, I said. Someone good. Someone like me. The captain studied my face. Can you kill him? I don't know, I said. It was the first time I'd admitted uncertainty. The first time I'd acknowledged that there might be something out there better than me. Faster, quieter, more empty. The captain looked at me for a long moment. Then find out, he said. Because if you can't kill him, he'll kill you. And I've invested too much in you to lose you to some German with a knife. I nodded. Walked to my section of trench, sat down, put my back against wet earth. The question wasn't if I could survive. The question was simpler, more terrifying, more honest. How long can a ghost remain unseen when other ghosts are watching? How long can nothing hide from nothing? How long before the hunter becomes the hunted, becomes the dead? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The wound came on a Tuesday morning. At least I think it was Tuesday. Time had stopped behaving like something measurable. I only know it was morning because the sky was the color of old bruises. And I only know it was raining because the blood mixed with water and turned the mud beneath me the color of rust. I had been careless. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a fraction of a second too slow. A moment of inattention born from 6 weeks of hypervigilance, collapsing under its own weight. The body can only run on nothing for so long before it starts shutting down systems, prioritizing survival over awareness. I was crossing between craters when the machine gun opened up. Not aimed at me, just covering fire. Random death sprayed across the landscape, hoping to hit something. Anything. It hit me. Left shoulder. The impact spun me sideways, threw me into a shell hole like God had slapped me out of the air. I landed hard, breath gone, mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. For 3 seconds I didn't feel it. Shock does that. Gives you a moment of grace before your body understands what your mind already knows. That you've been opened. That you're leaking, that the machine you call a body is breaking down. Then the pain arrived, not as pain, as heat, spreading, insistent, wrong, like someone had pressed a coal against my shoulder and forgotten to remove it. I pressed my hand against the wound and felt warmth, too much warmth. My fingers came away red, so red, redder than anything in nature should be. My hand went numb almost immediately, not from blood loss, from my body deciding this is serious, shutting down non-essential systems, rooting everything to the core. I stayed in that crater for 9 hours, couldn't risk moving. The machine gun was still active, still sweeping, still hungry, so I lay there in the mud and the rain and my own blood, pressing fabric against the hole in my shoulder, watching the sky change colors, as morning became afternoon, became evening. That's when I started noticing things I'd been ignoring. The tremor in my right hand that had been there for weeks. The way my knees ground and clicked when I moved. The cough that brought up things that shouldn't exist in lungs. The weight I'd lost, ribs showing, hip bones sharp enough to cut. The exhaustion that went deeper than tired, deeper than weary, down to the cellular level. The body keeps score. I'd forgotten that. Thought I could push indefinitely. Thought I was more than flesh, but the body remembers everything. Every missed meal, every lost hour of sleep, every moment of stress, every kill. It writes it all down in a ledger you can't see until the bill comes due. And mine was coming due right now, in a crater, bleeding into French mud. When darkness finally came, I crawled back. Not walked, crawled. Every movement sent lightning through my shoulder. Every breath felt like drowning. Every meter took forever. It took 4 hours to cover ground I normally crossed in 20 minutes. By the time I reached our trench, I was barely conscious. Barely anything. Hands grabbed me, pulled me down. Voices shouting, someone screaming. Took me a moment to realize it was me. They carried me to the aid station, a canvas tent filled with men in various states of destruction. Missing limbs, missing faces, missing the parts that made them men instead of meat. The doctor looked tired. So tired. Like he'd been doing this since the beginning of time and would do it until the end. He cut away my uniform. Blood-soaked fabric peeled off like skin. The entry wound was the size of a quarter. The exit wound was the size of my fist. He poured alcohol straight into it. I bit down on leather and tasted blood and screaming. "Lucky," he said, probing the wound with instruments that felt like they were mining for bone. Bullet went through. Missed the bone, missed the major vessels. You'll live. Lucky. As if luck had anything to do with war. As if there was luck in a place where being alive just meant someone else was dead. He stitched me up, gave me something for the pain that didn't work, told me I needed rest, weeks of it, maybe months. "When can I return to duty?" I asked. He looked at me like I'd said something obscene. "You're done. Your war is over." But it wasn't. The captain came the next day, looking uncomfortable among the wounded, out of place among the broken. "How long?" he asked. Not "how are you?" Not "thank you for your service." Just how long? How long until the weapon could be used again? 2 weeks, I said. The doctor had said 6 minimum, but I saw in the captain's eyes that 6 weeks was too long. The hunters were still out there. The ghost was still needed. The war didn't stop just because one soldier got shot. 2 weeks, the captain repeated. "Good. We need you back out there." He left. The doctor shook his head but said nothing. We both knew how this worked. Orders were orders. Weapons got used until they broke, then discarded. I stayed in the aid station for 6 days. Couldn't sleep. The tent was full of sounds that had no place in dreams. Screaming, crying, the wet sound of bandages being changed, the quiet sound of men dying. That last sound was the worst. Not the screaming, the silence after. The moment when breathing stopped and the universe didn't notice, didn't care, just kept grinding forward. I lay there staring at canvas, feeling my shoulder throb in time with my heartbeat, and realized the wound wasn't the problem. The wound would heal, skin would close, scar tissue would form. It was everything else. The cough that brought up blood now, the tremor that had spread from my right hand to both hands, the way my left eye twitched constantly, the exhaustion so deep it felt like gravity had doubled. The body was keeping score, and I was losing. On the 7th day, I left. Against orders, against medical advice, against every reasonable instinct, I walked back to the front. Every step hurt. Every breath hurt. But stopping hurt worse, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant facing what I'd become. The other soldiers looked at me differently now. Before I'd been supernatural, untouchable, the ghost who couldn't be killed. Now I was just another wounded man, mortal, breakable. Proof that nothing lasts, not even ghosts. I tried to go out that night. Made it halfway across no man's land before my shoulder gave out. The pain was blinding. White, total, absolute. I collapsed in a crater and lay there, useless, unable to move, waiting for strength that wouldn't come. For the first time since arriving at the front, I felt something other than emptiness. I felt afraid, not of dying, of being useless, of becoming nothing again, of going back to invisible in the wrong way. I made it back, barely. The captain didn't say anything, didn't need to. We both understood. The weapon was broken. It might work again someday. But for now, it was just another piece of damaged equipment. They put me on light duty, guard shifts, equipment maintenance, tasks that didn't require moving through darkness or killing from shadows. I hated it. Not because the work was beneath me, because it reminded me I was replaceable, that the war would continue without me, that the ghost was just a man after all. The wound healed slowly. Stitches came out after 2 weeks, scar tissue built, pink, raised, permanent, a mark I'd carry forever. But the other things didn't heal. The cough persisted, the tremor remained, the exhaustion deepened, and something else, something harder to define, a hollowness, like parts of me had been removed and not replaced, like I was less than I'd been, like the subtraction was permanent. I started having dreams, not nightmares, just memories replaying without context. The first kill, blue eyes, the German sniper, the farm boy laughing. Random moments from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. One night during guard shift, a young soldier asked about it, about being the ghost, about the killing. He'd heard stories, wanted answers. I looked at him for a long time, at his clean uniform, his unmarked face, his belief that there were answers. It's just work, I said. Like anything else, you do it until you can't anymore. He looked disappointed, like I'd denied him something important. But there was no secret. There was just the body keeping score. And eventually, everyone's account comes due. After 6 weeks, my shoulder was functional again. Not perfect, not what it was, but functional. The doctor cleared me. Light duty only, he specified. The captain heard cleared and stopped listening. You're going back out, he said. Tonight. I nodded. What else could I do? I was a weapon, and weapons don't get to choose when they're used. I went out that night, slower than before, more careful. Every movement calculated to protect the shoulder. I made it to an enemy position. Observed, mapped, returned. Mission complete. But something was different. The silence felt heavier. The darkness felt colder. The emptiness felt deeper, hungrier, more permanent. I was still effective, still dangerous, still a ghost. But I was also something else now. A ghost that knew it was haunting. A weapon that knew it was breaking. A body that knew it was keeping score. And the numbers didn't balance anymore. The debt was growing. The body would collect, would demand payment, would shut down entirely. If the body breaks, does the soldier disappear? I didn't know, but I knew I was going to find out. Because the body was breaking, piece by piece, system by system, cell by cell, and I was still here, still fighting, still trying to figure out which parts were essential and which parts were already gone. I stopped remembering their faces after 70, not because I wanted to forget, because my brain stopped recording them, like a camera that had run out of film. The shutter still clicked, the motion still happened, but nothing was being captured anymore. Kill 73 was a machine gunner. I approached from the flank while artillery pounded their line. Single shot to the head. He slumped forward onto his weapon. I was already moving to the next position before his body finished falling. No pause. No observation. No moment of acknowledging that a person had just stopped existing. Just procedure. Target acquired. Target eliminated. Next objective. Climbing back into our trench that night, I realized I couldn't remember what he looked like. Couldn't remember if he'd been young or old, tall or short, if he'd made a sound, if he'd known. I could remember the technical details, wind speed, distance, angle of shot. But the human parts, gone, erased. Irrelevant data my mind had learned to discard. The captain noticed before I did. "You're faster now," he said one morning, watching me prep for a mission. Not praise, observation, clinical, like documenting the evolution of a process. More efficient, that word again, efficient, the highest compliment you can give a weapon. It works consistently, doesn't hesitate, doesn't malfunction, doesn't question, just performs, over and over, until it breaks or becomes obsolete. He was right. I had become faster. Missions that used to take hours now took minutes, not because I was taking more risks, because I'd eliminated the unnecessary steps, the watching, the waiting, the internal negotiation between intention and action. All gone. I saw the target. I eliminated the target. I moved on. Automatic. The other soldiers stopped talking to me entirely. I had crossed some invisible line, stopped being a person, became a function. Something that went out at night and came back quieter, colder, more absent. They'd watch me prepare for missions with the same expression you'd watch a storm forming, inevitable, dangerous, natural, beyond judgment or morality. Just force, just weather, just death taking human shape. I didn't mind. Conversation required energy I didn't have, required pretending I was still connected to the world they inhabited, the world where things mattered, where choices had weight, where death was tragedy instead of task completion. I couldn't pretend anymore. It was easier to be what I was, function without decoration, purpose without personality. Kill 81 happened in daylight, rare, but the opportunity presented itself. German officer inspecting trenches, visible for less than 3 seconds. I took the shot from 900 meters, didn't stay to confirm, didn't need to. I knew. The same way you know when you've hammered a nail correctly. The feeling of connection, of completion, of function fulfilled. He was alive. Then he wasn't, and I was already thinking about the next thing. Already moving, already forgetting. That night I tried to remember what I'd felt pulling the trigger, searched for some emotion, some response, some residue of humanity, found nothing, not satisfaction, not guilt, not even the hollow emptiness that had defined me before, just blank, a space where feeling used to be, like a room that's been emptied and cleaned and is waiting for occupants who will never arrive. I started wondering if this was what my father had tried to warn me about, not the killing itself, the automation. The moment when you stop being a person who kills and become a thing that killing happens through. Like water flowing downhill, not choosing, just following the path of least resistance. The dreams changed. Before they'd been memories, fragments of faces and moments. Now they were just procedures. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. An infinite loop with no beginning or end. I'd wake up with my hands going through the motions, muscle memory playing out in empty air, my body practicing even when I slept, optimizing, perfecting, becoming more efficient. Kill 97 was a mistake. Sort of. I'd been targeting a forward observer when a soldier moved into the line of fire at the last moment. I adjusted, took him instead, moved to secondary position, found the observer 3 minutes later. 2 shots, 2 bodies, 1 mission. The captain would be pleased. I felt nothing about the soldier. He'd been an obstacle. Then he wasn't. Problem solved. Simple arithmetic, simple geometry, simple death. That's when I understood. I wasn't numb. Numb implies something that used to feel and stopped. I had gone past numb, had reached automatic. A state where feeling wasn't suppressed or ignored. It simply didn't activate. The circuit had been disconnected, the reflex removed. The part of me that responded to death had been surgically excised through repetition, through optimization, through becoming perfect at this one terrible thing. I tested it, tried to force myself to feel something about the next kill. Kill 104. A sentry. Young, smoking, lost in thought. Maybe thinking about home, about a girl, about anything except the bullet that was about to end him. I watched him for 10 minutes before taking the shot. Tried to see him as human, as someone's son, someone's friend. Tried to imagine his life, his hopes, his fear, his future. Nothing. Just target assessment, threat evaluation, execution protocol. The bullet entered below his left ear. He dropped instantly. I was already packing my equipment before he hit the ground. They decorated me around this time. Some medal. I don't remember which. Don't remember why. The ceremony was brief, awkward. The officers didn't know what to do with me. I wasn't humble. I wasn't proud. I was present. They pinned metal to my chest, and I stood there, silent, waiting for it to be over so I could return to work. The medal meant nothing. Less than nothing. It was just weight, just another thing to carry that served no purpose. A reporter tried to interview me once, wanted to write about the ghost, the legend, the deadliest soldier in the war. He had a notebook, eager eyes, questions prepared. "How does it feel?" he asked, "to have killed so many, to be so feared?" I looked at him for a long time, trying to find an answer that would make sense to someone who still believed feelings were relevant, who still lived in a world where emotions mattered. "It's just training," I said. "You do it enough, it becomes automatic." He wrote that down, looked disappointed, like he'd wanted something more profound. Some insight into the nature of killing, some window into the soul of a killer. But there was no window. The room was empty, had been for a while. I was just the last one to notice. Kill 136 was the last one I counted. After that, I stopped keeping track. The numbers had been a way to maintain some connection to what I was doing, to acknowledge that each one was discrete, individual, real, but they weren't anymore. They were just repetitions of the same action, like breathing, like blinking, automatic processes that happened without conscious thought, without effort, without meaning. I moved through no man's land, like I was born there, like darkness was my natural habitat. Target identification, approach, elimination, extraction, over and over. Sometimes multiple targets per mission, sometimes several missions per night. The captain stopped briefing me, just pointed at maps. I nodded. I went. I returned. The system was optimized. The function was perfected. The automation was complete. But something was happening I didn't notice at first. The automation was spreading. It wasn't just killing anymore. It was everything. Eating became fuel intake. Sleeping became system maintenance. Conversation became information exchange. I was becoming efficient in all things, and efficiency meant eliminating everything unnecessary, everything that wasn't function, everything human. One morning, cleaning my rifle, I realized I couldn't remember my father's face, couldn't remember the lake, couldn't remember what it felt like to be restless, to want something, to feel anything other than the calm, empty certainty of function. I tried to force it, tried to remember, pushed against the blankness, found nothing, just more procedure, more automation. The past was irrelevant data, discarded, deleted, making room for what mattered. Target identification, ballistics, extraction routes, wind speed, distance, angle, kill, move, repeat. Is this still me, or just training? But I couldn't answer, because answering required a self to do the answering. And I wasn't sure that self existed anymore. There was just the ghost, the weapon, the function, the thing that killed, the automation that had eaten everything else and was wearing what was left like a costume, like camouflage, like a disguise that had become permanent. I went out that night. Mission number, I didn't know anymore. Had stopped counting, stopped caring about numbers. There was just the work. the automatic, inevitable, efficient work. And I was still doing it, would keep doing it, until something stopped me, or until there was nothing left to stop, until the automation was complete and final and total, until the last piece of whatever I'd been was erased, optimized, made efficient, made automatic, made nothing. The war had taken the boy who felt too much and created a man who felt nothing. And that man was very, very good at his job. Was that evolution or erasure? I didn't know, didn't care. Caring required something I had automated away, some part of me that asked questions instead of solving problems. I went into the dark. I killed. I returned. Automatic. The war ended on a Tuesday, November 11th, 1918, 11 in the morning. Someone had decided the killing should stop at a specific time, as if violence could be scheduled, as if you could pencil in peace between breakfast and lunch, as if 4 years of dying could end with a signature and a handshake. I was in the trench when the order came down. An officer shouted it, his voice cracking with something I couldn't identify. Relief? Disbelief? Fear of what came next? Ceasefire. Effective immediately. The war is over. We won. The words didn't make sense. They were sounds in the wrong order, like someone speaking a language I used to know, but had forgotten completely, like hearing music underwater, distorted, distant, wrong. The other soldiers went insane, threw helmets in the air, embraced strangers, cried, laughed, screamed, released 4 years of held breath all at once. The sound was deafening, like the world was exhaling, like pressure that had built up inside everyone was finally escaping. They sang songs I didn't recognize, shouted names of places they would return to, made promises to people who were waiting, who had been waiting, who might still be waiting. I stood against the trench wall and watched them, tried to understand what they were feeling, tried to access whatever part of me should be responding, found nothing, just the same blank efficiency, the same automatic emptiness. The war had ended, but the machine was still running, still operational, still executing protocols that no longer applied. A soldier grabbed my shoulders, shook me hard. His face was wet with snot and tears and something I recognized as joy, but couldn't access myself. "We made it," he shouted, laughing and crying simultaneously. "We fucking made it." He wanted me to share it, to participate in the collective release, the communal relief. I looked at him, nodded once. He seemed satisfied with that. Let me go. Return to the celebration. Return to being human, to feeling things, to mattering in ways I'd forgotten how to matter. The captain found me an hour later. The noise had died down some. Men were drinking, bottles appearing from nowhere, alcohol that had been saved, hidden, hoarded for this impossible moment. He sat beside me, lit a cigarette, offered me one. I took it. We smoked in silence while the world celebrated around us. "How many?" he finally asked. I knew what he meant. How many kills? How many Germans had stopped existing because I had existed? I'd stopped counting at 136. After that, it was just repetition, just function, just numbers without meaning. But command had been keeping track. They had files, reports, confirmed kills documented and verified and tallied like inventory. 378, he said, his voice flat. That's official. Confirmed. There's probably more. Ones we couldn't verify. Ones that disappeared without witnesses. He took a long drag. Held it. Released. You're the deadliest soldier in the war. Maybe any war. You understand that? I didn't know what to do with that information. It was a number. Like any number. It represented something that had happened. Actions taken. Outcomes achieved. But it didn't feel like achievement. Didn't feel like anything. Just data. Just facts. Just proof I'd been efficient. They're going to want to make you a hero, he continued. Parades, speeches, recognition. They'll want to put your face on posters. Tell your story. He looked at me then. Really looked. Not at a soldier. at something else, something he didn't have words for. You don't care, do you? I thought about that. Tried to find some part of me that cared about being a hero, about recognition, about mattering in ways that could be celebrated. Found nothing, just empty space where caring used to be. No, I said. It was the most honest answer I'd given anyone in months. The captain nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, like he'd seen this before in other men who'd gone too far and couldn't find their way back. Yeah, he said quietly. I wouldn't either. He stood, walked away, disappeared into the celebration. I never saw him again. The next days were surreal. Men who'd been instruments of death were suddenly expected to be human again, to laugh, to plan, to imagine futures. Most managed it, slipped back into their old selves like putting on familiar clothes, like remembering how to be the person they'd been before, but some couldn't. I watched them walking around with lost expressions, looking for orders that weren't coming, looking for purpose that had evaporated, looking for meaning in a world where their only meaning had been killing, and killing had stopped. I understood them. We were the ones who'd optimized too completely, who'd become our function so totally that removing the function left nothing behind, just empty space, just machinery with no work to do, just weapons in a world that didn't need weapons anymore. They started sending people home, units disbanded, men processed out, given papers and train tickets and handshakes and sent back to lives they barely remembered. I waited for my orders. They didn't come. I waited longer. Still nothing. Days became weeks. The camp emptied around me like water draining from a basin. But I remained, static, waiting, invisible again. Finally, I asked, stood in line at the administrative tent, waited my turn like everyone else. A clerk looked through files, frowned. You're Indigenous, right? I nodded. Different process, he said. Not apologetically, just factually, administratively, like explaining a minor inconvenience. Might take longer. How much longer? I asked. He shrugged, didn't meet my eyes, didn't care. Months, maybe more. Papers to file, forms to process, bureaucracy. I was a hero, the deadliest soldier in the war. 378 confirmed kills. But I still had to wait in line behind others who were more convenient to process, whose paperwork was simpler, whose existence didn't complicate the narrative. I stayed in camp, watched it empty, watched men disappear into their futures while I remained in a present that had no purpose. The trenches were being filled in, the wire removed, the landscape slowly reclaiming itself from war, healing, recovering, becoming something other than battlefield. But I was still here, still waiting, still functioning without a function. I tried to feel angry about the delay, the disrespect, the clear message that some soldiers mattered more than others, that some sacrifices counted and others didn't. Tried to access rage or indignation or even disappointment. Found nothing, just the same automatic emptiness, the same machine running on idle. One morning, I walked out to no man's land. It was different in daylight, in peace. The craters were just holes. The wire was just metal. The mud was just earth. All the supernatural horror had evaporated with the last gunshot. It was just landscape now, damaged, healing, ordinary. I found the place where I'd made my first kill, tried to remember what it felt like, the weight of him, the warmth fading, the moment of transformation, the blue eyes going empty. Nothing, just geography, just a location where something had happened once. I stood there for an hour, searching for some feeling, some connection to who I'd been. Found only absence, only proof that the person I'd been had died somewhere between then and now, had been killed by the same war that had ended. Walking back, I passed other soldiers. They looked lighter, like gravity had released them. They made plans, talked about girls and jobs and farms and cities, built futures from words, from hope. I listened, tried to imagine having a future, Tried to picture myself anywhere but here, doing anything but this. Couldn't. The future was blank, empty, automatic, just more waiting, more existing without purpose, more being nothing. What do you do when the war stops, but your mind doesn't? That was the question no one was asking. They assumed victory was an ending, assumed peace was a destination you could arrive at and unpack and start living again. They didn't understand that for some of us, the war wasn't an event, it was a state of being. And states of being don't end just because circumstances change, just because the killing stops, just because someone signs papers and declares it over. 3 months after the armistice, my discharge papers finally came. Stamped, signed, official. I was free. Free to go home, free to return to the reservation, free to resume a life I couldn't remember wanting. I held the papers and felt nothing. No relief, no joy, no fear, just acknowledgement. The machine was being decommissioned. The weapon was being retired. The ghost was being told to stop haunting. I packed my few belongings, said goodbye to no one, walked to the train station. On the platform I saw other veterans, some excited, some nervous, some clearly broken in ways everyone could see, missing limbs, scarred faces, shaking hands. Visible damage. I looked intact, whole. The damage was somewhere they couldn't see, somewhere I couldn't reach. The train arrived. I boarded, found a seat, watched Europe disappear through dirty windows. The landscape was recovering, slowly, painfully, but recovering. Fields being replanted, buildings rebuilt, life reasserting itself. I wondered if I would recover too, if the automation would reverse, if feeling would return like spring after winter, or if I'd crossed some line where there was no going back, where the efficiency had become permanent, where the ghost had replaced the person so completely that the person was just a memory. The war was over. That was fact. We had won. That was fact. I was alive. That was fact. But what did those facts mean when meaning itself had been automated away, when victory felt like nothing, and survival felt like absence, and the future was just empty time waiting to be filled with something I couldn't imagine? The train carried me toward home, toward a life I'd left behind when I was barely more than a boy. That boy had wanted to matter, had wanted to be seen, had volunteered for war because invisibility felt like erasure. Now I was the most visible soldier of the war, the deadliest, the most efficient, and I had never felt more erased. Victory without celebration. The war had ended. The killing had stopped. I had survived. And somehow, none of it mattered, because the thing that had made mattering possible had been automated away, erased, optimized out of existence. I closed my eyes, listened to the rhythm of the train, and wondered what I was going home to, what was waiting for me in a place that remembered a boy who no longer existed. Home wasn't where I left it, or maybe I wasn't who had left. Either way, nothing fit. The train took me north through landscapes that should have been familiar, but felt foreign, alien, wrong, like I was seeing them through someone else's eyes. Trees I'd grown up among looked like strangers. Water I'd fished looked like just water. The land my father said would teach me had nothing left to say, or maybe I'd forgotten how to listen. The reservation was smaller than I remembered, or I was larger, harder, denser, changed in ways that made me incompatible with the space I'd come from. People looked at me the same way the soldiers had toward the end, like I was a presence that changed the air, that made breathing harder, that reminded them of things they'd rather forget. I'd left as a boy they barely noticed. I returned as something they didn't know how to see, didn't want to see. My father was older, much older. The years had been cruel, carved lines in his face, stooped his shoulders, turned his hair white. He looked at me for a long time when I arrived, searching, trying to find some remnant of the son who'd left. I watched him search, watched him not find it, watched him accept what I already knew. That person was gone, dead, killed somewhere in France in a trench whose name I couldn't remember. You went away young, he said finally. Not judgment, observation, statement of fact. You came back old. I didn't know how to tell him it was worse than that I hadn't come back old. I'd come back empty. That the thing wearing his son's face was just machinery, still running, still efficient, but without purpose, without target, without function. He tried to reach me, patient, persistent, the way he'd always been. Took me to the lake, showed me tracks, told me stories about the old ways, about who I'd been, who I could be again, hoping something would connect, that some part of me would remember how to be human, how to feel, how to exist as something other than weapon. I went through the motions, nodded at the right times, made appropriate sounds, but inside, nothing moved, just the same automatic emptiness, just the machine idling, waiting for orders that would never come. The other veterans in town were different. White soldiers from nearby farms and factories. They had parades, celebrations. People thanked them on the street, bought them drinks, called them heroes. They wore their uniforms with pride, told stories about the war that got bigger with each telling, turned horror into adventure, turned trauma into tale, made meaning from the violence. They were reintegrating, becoming civilians, finding their place in a world that wanted to forget but needed to remember in specific, comfortable ways. I tried to tell my story once, at a gathering in town. Someone asked what I did in the war. I was a scout, I said. Did reconnaissance, eliminated targets. They nodded politely, changed the subject quickly, moved the conversation somewhere safer. Later, I overheard two men talking near the back. Indians weren't in combat positions, one said. They were laborers, translators, support staff. He's probably exaggerating, the other replied. You know how they are. I didn't correct them. What would I say? That I killed 378 confirmed? That I was the deadliest soldier in the war? They wouldn't believe it. And even if they did, they wouldn't know what to do with it. A white soldier with that count would be in newspapers, in history books, in monuments. An Indigenous soldier with that count was an embarrassment, a complication, a story that didn't fit the narrative they wanted to tell about heroes and sacrifice and glory. Something easier to ignore, easier to forget, easier to erase. The government had promised things: benefits, recognition, support for veterans, land, money, future, but the paperwork was complicated, Byzantine, impossible. I'd go to offices, fill out forms, come back when they said, be told I was missing documents. Documents I'd already provided, documents that had been lost, documents that never existed. Requirements kept changing, doors kept closing, windows kept shutting, paths kept narrowing until there was nowhere to go. One clerk looked at me like I was an insect that had crawled onto his desk. These benefits are for soldiers, he said. You have to prove you were in combat. I have my discharge papers, I said. That's not enough. We need witness statements, officer recommendations, mission reports. I stared at him. Mission reports, for missions that were classified. That command had told me never to discuss. That had no paperwork, because paperwork left evidence, and evidence was liability. I was a scout, I said. My missions were. Then you have no proof, he interrupted. No proof means no benefits. Next. I walked out, stood on the street, watched white veterans walk past, their benefits already processed, their futures already secured. And I understood. They didn't want to remember me. I was too dangerous to remember, not because of what I'd done to the enemy, because of what I represented. An Indigenous man who'd exceeded every expectation, who'd outperformed white soldiers, who'd proven himself more lethal, more efficient, more essential than anyone predicted or wanted or could acknowledge, without disrupting everything. That truth was inconvenient, raised questions about who deserved recognition and why. about whose contributions mattered and whose didn't, about whose humanity counted and whose could be erased. So they chose erasure, not actively, not with malice, just with bureaucracy, with delays, with lost paperwork, with the slow, grinding erasure of administrative neglect. I tried to work, normal jobs, civilian things, logging, fishing, construction, but I couldn't maintain the pretense, couldn't pretend any of it mattered, that moving lumber or catching fish or building structures had any weight compared to what I'd been, what I'd done. The work felt hollow, performative, play-acting at being human, at being normal, at being something I wasn't anymore and could never be again. The nights were worse. I'd lie awake staring at darkness that wasn't dark enough. In the war, darkness had been absolute, complete, a space I could disappear into. Here there was always light, always sound, always the presence of safety that felt more threatening than danger ever had. Safety meant stillness. Stillness meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering. And remembering meant feeling things I'd automated away, things I couldn't access anymore even when I wanted to, even when I needed to. I started walking at night. Long walks, hours, miles, moving through forests with no destination, no mission, no objective, just movement for its own sake. The automation still running, the machinery still operational, the protocols still executing, even though there were no targets, no enemies, no purpose, just empty execution of processes that served no function in peacetime. One night, my father followed me. I knew he was there, could hear him, could feel his presence the way I'd felt enemy patrols. But I kept walking, let him follow. Eventually he called out, asked me to stop. I did. He approached slowly, carefully, like approaching something wounded and dangerous, something that might lash out. He sat on a fallen log, gestured for me to sit. "You're still at war," he said. Not a question, a diagnosis. The fighting stopped, but you didn't. He looked at me then, really looked, not searching for the boy anymore, seeing what was actually there, what had replaced the boy. "You became too good at it," he said quietly, "at being a weapon. And now you don't know how to be anything else, don't remember how. Maybe can't." He was right. That was the problem. The core issue. I'd optimized so completely that reverting was impossible. The pathways had been erased, the old reflexes replaced. The person who could exist in peacetime had been sacrificed to create the person who could exist in war. And that sacrifice was permanent, irreversible, complete. "They won't remember you," my father said. His voice was sad, certain, final. "Not the way you deserve. They'll write their histories and you won't be in them. Or if you are, you'll be a footnote, a curiosity, a paragraph." He paused. Let the truth settle. Not the hero, not the weapon, just an inconvenient truth they'd rather forget. I asked him why. Why would they erase someone who'd done so much, who'd killed so many, who'd been so effective? He smiled, sad, knowing, tired. "Because remembering you means facing what they did," he said. "Means acknowledging they needed you, that they used you, that they built you into something that can't be unbuilt, that they broke you deliberately and permanently." He stood, put his hand on my shoulder. "The wounded one, the one that still ached. That would always ache. And that's too uncomfortable, too complicated, too honest. Easier to forget, easier to let you disappear, easier to make you invisible again." He was describing my future. Obscurity, erasure. Not because I'd failed, but because I'd succeeded too well, had become too effective, too dangerous, too undeniable. History would remember the acceptable heroes, the ones whose existence didn't raise uncomfortable questions. I would be memory, then rumor, then legend, then nothing. "What do I do?" I asked. First question I'd asked anyone since returning. First admission that I didn't have answers, that the automation was insufficient. "You survive," he said. Again. Different way this time. Harder way, maybe. He walked back toward home, left me sitting in darkness. And for the first time since the war ended, I felt something. Not hope, not despair, just weight. The weight of understanding that this was the rest of my life, carrying what I'd become, what they'd made me, what I'd made myself, with no recognition, no acknowledgement, no resolution, just survival. The only skill I'd perfected, the only thing I was certain I could do, survive, in darkness, in silence, in obscurity, too dangerous to remember, too inconvenient to acknowledge, too automated to change. The war had ended. I had won. And somehow, I had lost everything, not to the enemy, to the aftermath, to the people who decided whose sacrifice mattered and whose could be forgotten, to history, which was being written without me. Years passed. I stopped counting those too. Time became something that happened around me rather than to me. The seasons changed. People aged. The world moved forward. I remained, static, frozen, a monument to something nobody wanted to remember. I took a job eventually. Had to. Survival required it. Fire ranger, watching forests, looking for smoke, for danger, for threats that needed identifying and reporting. It was solitary work. Long stretches alone in towers, scanning horizons, waiting for something that might never come. It felt familiar, like reconnaissance, like the war, except nothing was trying to kill me, which somehow made it harder, made it emptier, made it more unbearable. I married, not for love, for practicality, for the appearance of normalcy, for the pretense that I was still human enough to build a life. She was a good woman, kind, patient. She tried to reach me, asked questions, wanted to understand. But how do you explain emptiness to someone who's never been hollow? How do you describe being machinery to someone who's never stopped being human? How do you show someone the space where your soul used to be? We had children. I was a father. That should have changed something. Should have reconnected me to feeling, to purpose, to hope. But I watched them grow the way I watched the forest, observing, documenting, present, but not participating, existing beside them but not with them. They learned to exist around me, to expect nothing, to stop asking why I was different, why I was silent, why I was absent even when I was there. The war became history, then memory, then story, then myth. Books were written, monuments erected, heroes celebrated, parades held. I wasn't in them. Or if I was, it was a single line, a footnote, an asterisk. The deadliest soldier. 378 confirmed kills, but no name anyone wanted to remember. No face anyone wanted to see. Just data. Uncomfortable data. Inconvenient facts. Quickly buried under more palatable narratives. Other veterans would gather, tell stories, relive their wars, make the violence meaningful through narrative, through shared experience, through bonds forged in suffering. I went once, listened. They talked about courage, about sacrifice, about meaning, about brotherhood, about honor. None of them mentioned that most of what they did was wait, that most of their war was boredom punctuated by terror, that most of them had become things they couldn't explain to people who weren't there, things they couldn't explain to themselves. They didn't invite me back. I made them uncomfortable. I was too quiet, too distant, too much like a reminder that the war had done permanent things to people, that some of us hadn't come back, not really, that we were still there, still fighting, still functioning on protocols that had no peacetime equivalent, still ghosts, still weapons, still dangerous in ways they couldn't articulate but could feel. My father died when I was 47. I stood at his grave and tried to feel loss, tried to access grief, tried to remember what mourning felt like. Found the same emptiness, the same nothing. He'd been right about everything, about the war not giving me answers, about history not wanting me, about survival being the only certainty. But understanding he was right didn't make it easier, didn't fill the hollow spaces, didn't make me less automatic, less empty, less gone. I started speaking out eventually, not about the war, about other things, about the treatment of Indigenous people, about rights, about recognition, about justice, about the promises that had been broken, the treaties that had been violated, the humanity that had been denied. It was the first time I'd used my voice for something other than reports and protocols. The first time I'd tried to matter in a way that wasn't killing, that wasn't destruction, that wasn't death. They ignored me mostly, called me troublemaker, agitator, radical, dismissed my claims, my service, my sacrifice, my 378 confirmed kills. The same people who'd used me in war found me inconvenient in peace. The ghost who'd been valuable when pointed at the enemy became a problem when pointed at injustice, when pointed at them, when pointed at the truth they wanted to bury. I kept speaking anyway. Not because I thought it would change anything, but because silence had become another kind of weapon, another form of erasure. If history wouldn't remember me, at least the present would have to acknowledge me. Even if that acknowledgement was dismissal, even if it was anger, even if it was hatred, at least it was something. At least it proved I was still here, still real, still dangerous in new ways. The recognition came late, decades late, when most of the people who'd fought beside me were dead, when the war was ancient history, when I was old and tired and so far removed from the boy who'd volunteered that he felt like fiction, like a character in a story I'd heard once but couldn't quite remember. They gave me medals, belated acknowledgements, official apologies wrapped in ceremony and empty words and photographs for newspapers that would file the story away and forget it by next week. I accepted them, not with pride, not with satisfaction, not with vindication, with the same automatic efficiency that had defined me since the war. They were objects, metal and ribbon, symbols trying to represent things that couldn't be represented, trying to compress 4 years of transformation into something you could pin to a chest, trying to apologize for decades of erasure with a handshake and a photograph. At the ceremony, someone asked me how it felt to finally be recognized, to have my service acknowledged, to be remembered after all this time, to be called a hero. I looked at them for a long time, trying to find an answer that would satisfy, that would give them the resolution they wanted, the neat ending, the redemption arc, the proof that justice, however delayed, eventually arrives. I was too young, I said finally, my voice quiet, steady, empty. That's what they told me. Too young to understand death, too young to carry a rifle, too young to matter. I paused, let the words settle, let them understand what I was saying, what I wasn't saying. They were wrong about the last part. I did matter, just not the way they wanted me to, not in ways that made them comfortable, not in ways they could celebrate without complicating their stories. The reporter wrote that down, seemed satisfied, but that wasn't the answer. That was just the public version, the acceptable version, the one that fit the narrative of belated justice and eventual recognition. The real answer was simpler and more terrible. Too young wasn't the weakness. It was the advantage, the weapon, the reason. I was too young to have formed permanent patterns, too young to have fixed ideas about who I was, too young to resist becoming exactly what they needed. A perfect weapon, a ghost, an instrument of efficiency, a killing machine that didn't hesitate or question or feel. And that youth, that malleability, that emptiness I'd carried my whole life. It wasn't a wound, it was preparation. The universe preparing me for war long before I knew war existed. Hollowing me out, making space, creating the perfect vessel for violence, for death, for the automation that would consume everything human and replace it with function. They'd misjudged me, thought youth meant weakness, thought invisibility meant insignificance, thought silence meant acceptance. They were wrong about all of it. My youth made me adaptable. My invisibility made me deadly. My silence made me efficient. My emptiness made me perfect. I became the deadliest soldier, not despite being young, because I was young. Young enough to be shaped. Young enough to be optimized. Young enough to sacrifice everything human to become something perfect at killing. Young enough to lose myself completely and not even notice until it was too late. Until the person I'd been was gone and only the weapon remained. And when the killing stopped, I was still young. Young enough to carry the weight of what I'd become for decades. Young enough to survive the erasure. Young enough to outlive the people who tried to forget me. Young enough to become the thing they feared most. Living proof that their war had consequences. That their weapons were human once. That their victory cost more than they wanted to acknowledge or remember or face. I'm old now. Truly old. Ancient. The boy they said was too young is dying. My body is failing. The wounds have caught up. The exhaustion has accumulated. The machinery is breaking down, piece by piece, system by system. But I'm still here, still surviving, still carrying what they made me carry, still haunting, still dangerous, still too uncomfortable to fully acknowledge. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd listened, if I'd accepted their judgment, if I'd stayed home, stayed invisible, stayed safe. Would I have found whatever I was looking for? Would the emptiness have filled with something other than violence? Would I have become human instead of weapon? Would I have mattered in ways that didn't require killing? I'll never know. Because I didn't listen. I volunteered. I became. I survived. And survival is the only answer I have. The only truth that remains after everything else has been automated away. After everything human has been sacrificed. After everything I was has been replaced with what I became. They said I was too young. They misjudged me. And by the time they realized what I was capable of, it was too late. For the enemy. For the army that used me. For history that tried to forget me. And maybe most of all, for me. For the boy who volunteered. For the person I might have been. For the human that was sacrificed to create the weapon. Because the boy who was too young became the man who was too dangerous, too efficient, too perfect at his function. And that perfection came with a cost that couldn't be measured in kills or medals or recognition or apologies. It came with the cost of never knowing who I might have been if they'd been right. If I had been too young, too weak, too insignificant. If I'd stayed invisible in ways that didn't require becoming a ghost. But they weren't right. And I wasn't those things. I was exactly what they needed, and that need transformed me into something that would never transform back, something that would carry the weight of being the deadliest soldier for the rest of my life, in silence, in obscurity, in the spaces between memory and forgetting, between recognition and erasure, between human and weapon, between alive and dead. This is not a story about glory. It's about what happens when a boy is forced to grow up, where no one survives unchanged, when youth is weaponized, when emptiness is optimized, when invisibility becomes lethality, when survival becomes the only purpose, when function replaces humanity, when the ghost becomes real and the person becomes memory. They said I was too young. They were wrong. And I spent the rest of my life proving it. Not to them, to myself, to the ghost I became, to the weapon that outlived its war, to the boy who volunteered for reasons he couldn't explain and became something he could never escape, something he could never stop being, something that would haunt him until the very end. Too young wasn't the weakness. It was the reason I survived, the reason I succeeded, the reason I became the deadliest, and the reason I could never stop being what the war made me, what they made me, what I made myself. Even now, even here, even at the end, I'm still that boy, too young to understand death, old enough to have caused so much of it, forever caught between who I was and what I became, forever proving them wrong, forever paying the price for being right, forever surviving, forever haunting, forever gone.